This is Justice Matters with Tim Buxton, coming to you from Yugambeh country of the Commonberry people of the Gold Coast, Australia. I'm your host, Tim, where my sole aim is to share conversations I get to have with inspiring people doing remarkable work to create a world where we all belong. This podcast is brought to you by the Just Travel Company. Experience wonder and unearth justice and discover the just way to travel today. Visit just-travel.co. Without further ado, here's our guest for this episode of Justice Matters. Nick Ruiz from Miles for Migrants. Welcome to the Justice Matters podcast.
Thanks for inviting me here. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, mate. We've had a bit of a chin wag, or a little chat, as we say in Australia, already, just talking about so many different things. Obviously, our shared passion for serving migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, all of the above that are looking to find, most of all, safety and a place to rebuild their lives. Nick, I came across you through a mutual friend of ours and flabbergasted by just the work you're doing, which started, albeit, with a Reddit thread that you're involved in. So on that note, do you mind, Nick, just kind of sharing a bit about how you kind of got engaged and involved in working with refugees, migrants, and maybe where Reddit came into the picture?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first of all, I would say that some of the best opportunities in your life come unexpected. So first, my journey brought me unexpectedly into Europe. So I live in the United States, and I do today, but as I was pursuing my master's degree and eventually my PhD in areas of artificial intelligence, my journey brought me out to Europe. And so I started out in the Netherlands, had a little stay in Germany, and then I lived in Italy for a total of 5 years. And during that time, as I was with my wife, Jen, we had our family there, and we were connected with an international community, with a local church there and an international community. And as we got more and more involved in leadership in that community, we would open up our home first to other master's degree students and PhD students from around the world who didn't have a family unit there. And usually they were in their apartments and felt lonely. And so we would invite people in, and we had a nice family going on. Eventually, we also had our two daughters. I have a daughter who's now 10 and 7. Both of them were also born in Italy. And so as we were acclimating and just really getting to develop a family there and working with internationals, one day I had this burning desire to learn more about persecution that happened in the world. And so as a Christian myself, I said what I like to call a dangerous prayer. And just like a morning prayer, I had asked just to be able to see more what it means to be persecuted. And about a week later, my church had a guest pastor come from Pakistan. His name is Latif. And unlike any other kind of sermon about impact and stuff, for the first time I got to meet an asylee who went through a harrowing journey of persecution himself for religious purposes. And he was here in my city in Trento, Italy. And I also learned that his story was not complete. He was waiting for his wife and son to be able to reunite with him. And through that experience, I got to learn more about his life. And ultimately, I got to see his own family reunion. But the story didn't end there. Shortly after that, other refugees from Pakistan in similar situations were arriving in Trento, Italy. And we had a community that was supporting family reunifications after these asylum seekers received asylum in Italy and finally would get their family visa. But each time we would have families of 6 to 7 who needed to come to Italy. And so each time it was about €5,000 to
Mm.
fly their families. And all of the financial support dried up. But I had a friend of mine who I knew for about 3 years,
Yeah.
and he was getting so close to having his family visa. And it was a time that I was about to return to the United States. As a PhD student, I was getting probably less than the minimum wage, but
Wow.
I told him, we will find a way. Don't worry about the cost,
Mm.
but we're going to find something. Around the time, I had been doing a lot of research on travel on Reddit, because also as a student, I didn't have a lot of money to fly back to the United States,
Yeah.
especially with what became a family of 4. So I started to explore airline miles and credit cards that you get sign up bonuses for,
Right.
to basically fly my family. But in my research, as I was thinking about how I could help my friend, I discovered that I could use 120,000 American Airlines miles and less than $500 to solve a €5,000 problem.
Wow.
And in the end, I booked the flight, and his family was reunited. I wasn't in Italy at the time, but a friend of mine went and picked them up, and he sent me the pictures, and it was just so amazing to see what I could do with just a small amount of miles. Um,
Mm.
it's just something that I just remember vividly, even to this day. But I took that idea and I went back to that Reddit community where I learned about points and miles, and
Mm.
I shared this story about this great redemption of miles, because this
Yeah.
community, they love they usually love business class flights
Right.
at reduced cost, and really they are really world travelers, and they love
Sure.
to share about the way that they are able to get the most amazing trips.
They
And
hacked the
so
system.
yeah, exactly. So I shared about my best redemption. I didn't know what to think, really. But at the time it became, for a community of over 60,000 people, it became like the top upvoted story. And very shortly after, a moderator, this amazing person, Seth Stanton, reached out to me within moments, and he said, we have to start something. We neither of us really knew about what it was to build a nonprofit, but we knew that we were onto something, and that really started us along on our journey in 2016.
I love that. I love the scrappiness you describe that story with. Great things don't often start in a boardroom. They start in the back room, just trying to figure out your back was against the wall. You don't have the funds. This gentleman who, desperate to be reunited with his family, had no resources, and you found a way. And it's kind of inspiring, really. I think for people out there that might feel themselves, like faced with, wanting to make a difference, but feel like I've got nothing. Like what do I have? And now Miles for Migrant is this organization that, how many? I think last time we talked, it was like, was it 30,000? Like, how
Yeah.
many people have
So
you
so we
helped in
started
this
in
process?
2016, and to date we're just under 40,000 people that we've been able to fly.
40,000 redemptions. Redemption stories, right? I love the way you called it my best redemption on Reddit. This is my best redemption. And like, um, that's a reunion with each one of those flights. Um, I can imagine though, it's been a journey to get to where you've got.
Mhm.
One of the things I really appreciate about you is this is not your day job. You don't have a full time. You don't dedicate yourself full time to doing this. You work on the side, and you've obviously got PhD studies that you've pursued in along the way. What can you share some of the struggles of kind of like maybe from that first moment of like, hey, we were able to have this impact on this
Sure.
person's life to like to building this thing? Like what has it been, and what has that kind of journey been like
Yeah.
for you?
Sure. Yeah. So, as Seth and I decided to incorporate, and ultimately, Andy Friedman also joined us. The
Mm,
first challenge we had to solve was we didn't have context into developing a non-government organization,
right.
and we also had a lot of challenges that we needed to solve about how do we identify people who need to fly. Ultimately, we did build this NGO that mobilizes resources to remove barriers for transportation, but
Correct.
we needed to leverage other partnerships with NGOs, such as the International Rescue Committee, Catholic
Mm-hmm.
Charities, many others. But we really had to figure out how do we get started as three guys who aren't experts in human rights or
Right.
in global displacements. And so we just tried the best that we could, which was really to reach out to different organizations and just announce who we were, say what we were trying to do. And our first connection started with an organization in the UK called Together Now. They were the first group that believed in our story and started
Mm,
referring to us people who otherwise had their visas to be able to enter into the UK, but they needed that funding. And so we connected that with our network of travel enthusiasts who had airline miles. And so we were able to do our first cases. 2016 was only 3 passengers. But then we started to grow our NGO network. 2017 was about 100 passengers.
wow.
And then we grew to 2018 to over 400. And so quickly we were getting into kind of a system that was starting to work, but there was
Right.
a lot that we had to do on the way to discover how to make those connections, and then also how to grow our own team, which started out as a volunteer team and then into a professional team as we were really doing this at scale.
Mm. I love that you described there this idea of collaboration, which actually takes humility, right? It's like,
Mhm.
hey, um, I'm going to build this thing, but I know I can't build it on my own. I
Mhm.
know I'm going to need help. There's probably other organizations. And so often, we can look at other organizations that are doing similar things and think they're
Yeah.
our competitors in a
Mhm.
sad, weird way. Sometimes we can feel like we
Right.
have to prove ourselves, but often those organizations, even as large as they are, need the volunteers, the resources, the
Yeah.
networks, the things that you have to
Mhm.
offer, which can't be fixed by someone in a career role position at a big organization. They can only be done by networks on the ground. And one of the things that struck me too was use, or even became such an important part of one of the largest immigration organizations, the IOM, in helping to facilitate. They were knocking on your door suddenly saying, hey, can you help us? Is that correct?
It's slightly different than that. I would say, as we were first trying to grow in our impact and make connections, I would say first, of course, we knocked on IOM's door. I don't remember the exact year, but I think it was probably around 2019, 2018, 2019, when we first started knocking on IOM's door. And part of that was because one of the biggest problems of at least US based refugee resettlement is that for people who get official refugee status, they're able to fly to the United States and they receive a loan through the IOM. But the challenge is that they would have to pay it back
Right.
over the course of like 3 years or so. And so when you have families of 7 or 10, that quickly becomes an amount that could be a significant burden on the family as they're just trying to get jobs and establish their own financial stability. And that was often compounded by the fact that they might be resettling into very expensive cities like New York City, where
Wow.
they were placed in these places under the care of IRC or other refugee support organizations. But ultimately, we went to the IOM to say, hey, we have this idea. Is there a way that we could help alleviate the travel loan process? But we were also small. And then operationally, we were really making a big ask to really change how the U.S. refugee resettlement process would even work. And so naturally, that started out as a no. And I think probably if I were in their shoes, I might have said no as well, because this is an organization that flies millions or transports millions of people. And we were at that point flying about 1,500 passengers in a year. So, but what did happen was that at the time of
Afghanistan, was it?
Yeah, Afghanistan, when Kabul fell, there was quickly a mobilization challenge, and IOM was ready to respond in the United States by triaging Afghan humanitarian parolees who were airlifted to United States military bases. They were ready to respond and make sure that everyone was vetted, that they had all that they needed in terms of like medical examinations, and also ready for their end destination. But the challenge that they had was that they didn't have funding to operate, at least to facilitate the flights and the transportation. And that took time, but we had a great opportunity, and also in thanks to the Shapiro Foundation, where we were connected with IOM, with IRC, and we were able to bring our expertise in booking flights, as well as the generous donations that we had received from many of our donors, to be able to make a very large impact, really to the tune of flying over 20,000 people.
Wow. See, they did knock on your door in the end, and you, as a result of you being brave enough to reach out to them and show yourself that you were there. And I love the courage of being like, you know what, we might be small, we might not have everything, but it's almost like you looked in the mirror, and maybe you didn't feel like this, but from the outside looking in, as I hear you tell your story, Nick, it's like you were crazy enough to think that you could actually do this. And I think that's what, and when you have a reason, when you're deeply impacted by the people that you're serving, you will knock on anybody's door to find help and support. And I think, for many of us, we can easily lose heart in this process of building an organization, building a team, something bigger than ourselves. It can be easy to kind of revert back to when we get setbacks or hurdles or things are difficult. What I'm hearing as you share is that there are many challenges even to this day. How do you go to the next level? How do you make an even bigger impact? But you weren't afraid to take the next step that needed to be taken at that time.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is correct. I would say that there is a tremendous amount that I learned through developing partnerships and figuring out logistics in Miles for Migrants that actually helped my career as I developed in my own professional career, and also in the opposite direction. And so for me, I had a lot of development that happened from 2016 to today around boldness in making big asks to organizations, which I would then take to my job and then doing a better job in my job. But then also the hard skills that I was learning around information technology, developing systems, really
processes.
Exactly. And developing products as well that I could bring into the organization, and then think about how do we develop systems or things that can scale. So those things, alongside the skills that my team had and continues to have around marketing, around operations, all of that we were able to bring together in 2021, so that when we had this operational challenge of supporting Afghan parolees at the U.S. military bases, we really came up with a plan, and we proposed a lot of things to the IRC and IOM about how we could take some of that burden on. And we also developed other partnerships along the way to be able to scale the flight booking operations as well.
Oh, I hear innovation through all of that. Like, how do we change? How do we innovate? And that's that cross pollination, right? That you talk about in your personal life with work, nonprofit, because, yeah, you're right. Like in a nonprofit world, people that might be delving into it for the first time, you're going to realize this is a different animal in one sense. You're dealing with donors, not consumers. You're dealing with, and that's one side of things that make it happen. But you have to have a service that actually works and has impact. And we can talk about, all these flights, but did we give them to the right people? And that's the vetting process and making sure we're actually doing the most good. And there's all these challenges in every element of what we do. But I firmly believe in, and we've had a lot of guests recently that have been involved in business, that are doing business for good. And I think that there is this incredible innovation that we're at the cusp of right now with business and nonprofit, to not see them as separate entities, but to see how they can really work together to reform, in a sense, the way business is done, but also reform the way charity and nonprofit is done.
Right.
Because you can see faults in both sides, right? The charity that doesn't empower, that doesn't create that leg up. It's more a handout kind of mentality, or that makes someone dependent on welfare, right? Rather than, that assistance that they need to rebuild and restart and work. But then on the other side, you see business with it's about profit, but it doesn't actually always benefit society. That product might be terrible for society. It might cause high pollution, or it might cause, just be not good for relationships the way we want. I think humanity would at least want to see the future reality be. So, as you talk about that, and you've experienced those kinds of that kind of learnings in the process, I'd love for you to touch a little bit about your work. I know you said beforehand, as we were chatting, you didn't want to talk so much, but AI and the processes that you've learned, that's also a part of who you are and what you bring to the table. And I think it's I'm interested we're in the age right now with ChatGPT is just exploding, and things are going to rapidly change. I had a lawyer actually on who's the head of the Asian Pacific Institute of Artificial Intelligence. She's the executive director of that, talking about AI and how it's impacting. It hasn't been released. Well, it will have been released by the time you listen to this podcast, but this is all very important stuff. So do you mind just sharing a little bit about that and how it intersects maybe with your work?
Yeah, I guess rewinding back to my time in Italy, I was doing a PhD in speech translation. As far as the research work I was interested in, I was looking at how do you make speech translation more robust and reliable. But really, the motivation behind that was breaking down communication barriers that prevent people from authentically being able to join communities. So that work already aligns really well when you think about forced migration, people who are fleeing their countries due to persecution, torture, war, or even things like climate disaster, and entering into new countries where they didn't know the language. Part of the motivation around that work, that at least when I started my PhD, was around thinking about communities where language becomes a barrier. And technology and AI is incredibly powerful toward addressing that. A story that I can share that's not a win of my own is that For example, Microsoft, they really championed during COVID-19 a project alongside other companies to make sure that all of the resources and information that were changing every day were localized into all of the world's languages to make sure that the global South had the same opportunity to have information as the Anglo world or in Europe, for example. So I think these are great examples about how companies use innovation to also drive social good. And kind of from that same spirit, my own work at Interactions, where I've gone from a natural language processing scientist to a product director of creating AI products, we're always thinking about how do you take that technology and benefit a community, possibly giving better access through having virtual assistants that you can communicate in your native language.
Wow.
Or even as you look at ChatGPT, how do you make sure that the information is fair and reliable and trustworthy as you're seeing more and more that you can do with it, like avoiding things like fake news and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that world is pretty fascinating when it comes to, again, getting back to impacting lives.
This episode is brought to you by the Just Travel Company, your socially responsible travel concierge. Just Travel is the best kept secret in culturally immersive and justice-oriented adventures. Allow Just Travel to take the hassle out of your next trip and experience wonder and unearth justice. Discover the just way to travel today. Simply head on over to just-travel.co to learn more and book your next adventure, like our flagship Israel Istanbul trip launching out in mid-July 2023. Yeah, there's several things you've discussed which help, I think is going to be an inspiration to people out there, whether they're in a career that they're passionate about, to see that career, that thing that they're passionate about, can actually still be such a powerful force for good in our world. And as we kind of, you and I kind of really care about people that are persecuted, displaced, need safety, and that's obviously something that's a bit of a narrow focus for the people we care about. And I think it can be applied to any area of injustice, whether it be poverty and hungry kids, or whether it be women's rights and education. There's so much overlap in that. But, there's been a recent announcement, for example, with the US government recognizing, hey, the system that's really slowing down, like, migration to the US and refugee settlement, like the US opened up 100,000 spaces for refugees to come. Do you know how many came, even though they had a space for an allowance for 100,000? Do you know how many came through the system?
I don't remember the exact number, but I know it was a paltry amount.
It was like 25,000.
Yeah.
That was under Biden administration. Under the previous administration, it was like 12,000. That's the US. That's the United States, right? This is humongous, like, failure really on the government's part to process. And the problem that they identified is that there's this bottleneck with processing people. Embassies were shut during COVID, and things weren't able to be done. And that's where I see the emergence of organizations like yours. Their adoption now, the recent government has actually just announced they're going to adopt a Canadian kind of piloted program, which is empowering community sponsorship, where a group of families can gather together. Maybe they can all pull their air miles, and fly them out with their air miles, and then also provide that support when they're on the ground to help them through. And what that does is it puts the power of change in the hands of ordinary people like you and me. That a Reddit threat can spur an organization that can harness the interest and values of a whole community of people that say, yes, let's be a part of that. And I think, as I hear you talk, there's just so many ways businesses can use this and it's about putting releasing the shackles, I guess, and saying, hey, it's time that we all just, did our little bit. right?
Yeah, yeah. You raised a couple interesting points. So you talked about Canada and I think the generosity of individuals. And I think where that showed up very quickly as the war in Ukraine has continued to escalate, is that there has been a very strong response to bringing in Ukrainians into Canada. And one place where Miles for Migrants has been able to participate is that we co-funded with the Canadian government the Ukraine to
Amazing.
Canada Travel Fund, and so that was really first. Leveraging generous communities who were willing to sponsor families in their homes,
Mm,
and then that piece of transportation still remained a problem. And so we opened up a travel fund application where Ukrainians could apply for flights and get free flights to come to the United States. And the next version of that the U.S. government has started is this idea, as you mentioned, about community sponsors and looking at sponsorship as the way for Ukrainians to get humanitarian parole. So, like you said, you're already seeing it within government policy that that leaning toward communities sponsoring
mm.
families and welcoming them and making them feel like they belong in the community as a prerequisite to being able to come. So I think there's a lot that we've learned from Canada in that area.
Yeah. So, and Australia's launched a similar program. I think they're piloting it just for 1,500 humanitarian visas that have been
Mhm.
approved. The challenge, though, that you and I face is that um, the system set up to facilitate humanitarian refugee visas, it's a very
Yeah.
narrow system to get through.
Yes.
And you and I know, I mean, having lived abroad, some of the challenges in different processing of
Hmm.
how do you get in that system? You know, it's not it's a the privilege. You kind of sometimes it's who you know that enables you to
Yeah.
even get recognized. And so, how then do we provide? Because there's many avenues people
Mhm.
take to try and migrate. And, you know,
Yes.
they'll just if they've got the money, they'll jump on a plane and
Yeah.
fly, get a visa if they can, a tourist visa, and then overstay their visa, which puts them,
Yeah.
you know, not through the technical system, or they'll, in tragic circumstances, jump on a boat, you know, risk
Yeah.
their lives on dangerous seas, and you
Yeah.
know that they're not going to do that with their family or anybody unless they're desperate, unless they
Yeah.
really want another, they're afraid for their life, right?
Yeah, and here's even something that's just recently in U.S. government policy. So the U.S. government has released a policy that allows nationals from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Haiti, I think also Cuba, to receive humanitarian parole. Um, but there's a condition to that. These individuals can't receive the benefit if they cross the U.S.-Mexico border and apply for asylum. And to receive it, they actually have to fly into the United States. And so for that action to happen, they have to be able to afford the tickets to actually enter into that port of entry, and that's a large financial burden. And so this is one example of a program where there's certain ways that you can get access and get humanitarian parole, but this is also a place where Miles for Migrants can come in, and so we can use our miles and our cash, which I think is like 23,000 airline miles plus $50 per
Right.
person. And so this is a very tangible thing. And I would even say to the listening community that you could actually donate and make this possible so that people can come in and receive that human right that they deserve.
You heard it, guys. I mean, if you're looking for ways to actually make a difference in the life of a family that you know has been vetted, that you know will be able to restart their life, there's a way you can do that just with your miles. I mean, that's the beautiful thing, that you're out there looking for I mean, if this is the new parameters, how do we work around that? And that's the spirit actually of a refugee. You know, I've coined the term waymaker.
Mm.
And I think that is what they are. They will find a way when there is no way. And I think that's our commitment to them, is that when there's roadblocks, whether it be political roadblocks,
Yeah.
whether it be financial roadblocks, whether it be
Mhm.
roadblocks in the minds and hearts of people that don't
Yeah.
see these as human beings worthy of dignity for start, and the agency to determine where they want and believe that they are safe and united with their family. There's
Mhm.
nothing more important than seeing families
Yeah.
torn apart from each other.
Yeah, and when you say about how difficult it is for people to receive their human rights of safety, and really sometimes that distance can be thousands of miles or kilometers. Sometimes there is a barrier, like a physical wall, in the case of the
Mm.
U.S. Mexico border, that prevents that from happening. I like to think that the organization that we created with Miles for Migrants is an organization that our vision is to make safety only a few miles away. So
I
instead of
love that.
having to cross oceans or go through burdens of debt just to do that transportation, to make it just a little bit for people to be able to go to safety and not have to exercise so much resilience to do what is ultimately their human right.
Safety is only a few miles away. Um, I love that. I love that phrase. Uh, that is the truth, really, and that's the hard thing, right? Is there's so many other um, obstacles that try to get thrown in the way that don't
Mm-hmm.
need necessarily to be there. Um, I'm sure you've made your fair share of mistakes along the way, even as you've built this, and I think it's really
Yeah.
helpful and for all of us to reflect on, hey, in even in our best intentions,
Mm-hmm.
we don't always get it right, and that should never stop us from moving forward. I think that's just life, right? But but I think it's good to reflect on that, and also if you could share maybe some ways in which you've you or your organization have kind of had to rethink things, what doing justice and making a difference and trying to help hasn't always worked out the way you intended, and hopefully that'll be encouraging people who may feel like they've made a colossal mistake
Yeah.
and feel like they can't learn from that and move on. So would you mind, can I ask you a
Yeah.
couple of things?
Yeah. So let's get real. I should roll up my sleeves or something. So I want to
Get the
talk
tissue box out.
about, got it right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, you go.
So, so I want to be transparent about myself and my journey before looking at organizations. So I had the opportunity, like I said, in Italy, to be closely in community with refugees and asylees. And there's a bunch of beautiful things that came out of that. For example, my children growing up with their children, um, playing on the playground together, enjoying meals, crying together, spending time together. And that was a beautiful thing. Um, I'd say one of the things that I had to learn is that through those dinner table conversations and hearing really painful things about people looking for work or trying to figure out how to make their way, whether it was in Italy or even when I was back in back here in the United States with refugees I've met, one temptation I fell into many times was to take on more of a paternalistic nature in trying to help, meaning that if someone was looking for work and looking to be able to raise enough funds to support their family when their family would come, I would often try to oversolve problems for them, like helping them find the job
Mm,
that would be best for them, or even trying to jump into financial decisions and saying, "Hey, is that really what you want to do?" And while that was good natured, I like to think.
sure.
I know that in some cases I was taking away some of the liberties that I was actually striving for in the work that I was doing,
Mm,
and not letting people make their own decisions or even challenging those decisions, and not really having enough empathy into their thought process and things when things didn't agree with like my agenda. So that's me being real. And it took me a long time, I would say, kind of in this journey to really reflect on that and understand how I was both doing good and doing harm in some ways to the people I cared about. And one book that I think about is this book called When Helping Hurts by Steve Corbett and Brian Flickert. I think there's a couple other authors on there. And the premise of it is really kind of jumping into that good nature bit and really understanding what are the healthy boundaries that you should create to make sure that you're not actually creating some codependency and turning yourself into like a paternalistic figure that's going to figure things out, because ultimately that's harmful for long-term sustainability. And also, frankly, it just burns you out. I went through phases where I was really engaged to points when I felt like I can't do this, in part because I didn't really understand that it wasn't just helping someone. It's really that you're walking alongside someone, and in some cases, you're letting them lead.
Wow. Great book. I think it was a really impactful book, that When Helping Hurts, because I think it put into to words and into a framework that I think you and I in our own journeys have, struggled with and realized that the difference between empowerment and like you said, letting others lead in their own story of rescue. We don't need to be the rescuer. We need to be the guide, right? That's just championing them and supporting them, right? And we can't always be in control of the decisions that people make, right? Like that's another hard thing, I think, too, is like, there's a healthy detachment, right? That needs to be the boundaries when you so care about someone or an issue to like be okay that things don't happen as you wish. And to be honest, as I wish isn't the right outcome. It's got to be what they wish, right? And sometimes we can think we know what they want and we don't.
Yeah, it's true. You can't truly have empathy until you really understand what the other person needs. And I think about what Glyden De Freitas, who's our executive director, has brought as a principle in our organization. And I may butcher this, but it's in Lakesh Alakin. And it's basically what happens to someone else's body is like what happens to me. And so it's kind of the reverse of do unto others as you have done unto you. He's really, like, through his background in human rights, has really embedded this principle of what happens to you happens to me. What I do to you, I am doing to myself. And so thinking about this issue of dignity, it's very important to think about what sort of liberties I would want if I was in a situation like that,
right? But
also to take it one step further, because it's not just what I want as an American, as a white American male. It's really as someone from Uganda or someone from the Congo who is experiencing a new life and a new way of living. What are the things that they want as they're raising their families in their new countries?
So beautiful, man. Like, and that's a complicated thing, as we were talking earlier, because there's a whole nother system they have to live within that doesn't often offer, say, someone from Uganda living in America, that system and that culture doesn't offer them what they want and left behind. And yet somehow, they do deserve to still be able to bring their culture and not have to, I hate the word, assimilate into a new system. But, there is an integration that needs to take place. And I think that begins with learning that phrase. Can you say it again?
In Lakesh Alakin. It's a Mayan principle.
I love it. And what that's saying is that we are one. That Uganda, the Ugandan and the American are actually one. And when you don't have the us them mentality.
Mhm.
I'm the privileged, you're the
Right.
poor. When it's like we both have so much to offer each other and shared
Yeah.
experience, suddenly the I think the ability for both to
Yeah.
actually mutually flourish and learn and grow
Yes.
through that
Yeah.
exchange is felt.
Yeah. And I'm learning to lean into this principle now. So that if an Afghan is not getting their human rights, I am losing as well. So it becomes really
Mm.
a duty. And so I think my journey has gone from wanting to see what others are experiencing to seeing it to trying to fix it and then understanding more that it's their journey to fix and their journey becomes my journey as well.
So how can I help you on your way? How can I help you on the journey you want to take? And um, that is a privilege for us and that lead organizations that are involved in this work, is that we get to come alongside people um, and allow them to lead, right?
Yes.
But we get to remove obstacles. You know, I have
Yeah.
to share this. I got off the call from a friend who recently got some terrible news while the rest of the country here in Australia, 20,000, sorry, in Australia got some wonderful news. The Australian government, there was a change of government, which was a great news, I guess, for those from asylum refugee background. Some of the policies
Okay.
here in Australia have been terrible with offshore detention and onshore detention, which have taken people that have come here through more dangerous routes, taking boats, and not through the humanitarian system that's in place. 20,000 that came through that processing have been now allowed to receive visas to stay permanently, which is wonderful news.
Yes.
And was actually like, you know, a year or two ago, I didn't even think like it was possible. Unfortunately for my friend who was on a boat with 100 other people, he and his wife at the time and another couple were taken to a detention center on an island in the middle of the Pacific, whilst the others were taken to Australia, an Australian island called Christmas Island. Those
Mm.
that went to the Australian island and processed on the Australian island were a part of the 20,000 that were received, but because arbitrarily he was taken to another place, another on offshore
Mm.
country, middle Pacific island, he and all the others that were processed there at that and throughout the years of processing have been left off.
Mm.
He is an amazingly beautiful man, the most gentle husband to his wife, to I think 3 children. One of his daughters Eliana shares the name of my daughter, Eliana.
Mm.
We've become friends, and listening to his journey of now being in Australia for 10 years after being um, in this Pacific Island detention center previous to that, has now his children that were born here. They were born on detention offshore, now come to Australia. They've known is school here, and now have been told that they have to leave
Mm.
and start their life again. I share that story because um, it just breaks my heart that
Mhm.
um, there are people that just don't have that freedom and agency to choose.
Right.
And for him, who's can't even bear to think about having to leave after 10 years to start life again,
Mhm.
I think one of the most basic things a human needs is that sense of belonging and acceptance in that community that they're at. And they've built that.
Yeah.
They've got friends that love them,
Mhm.
support them, that are helping them. All they need is a piece of paper to say that they can get proper working documents, that they can get access to medical care, that their kids can get government support that everybody else gets. They can't get that, but yet they have community around them.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? I mean, for me, the beautiful thing is that you're bringing people to America, but you're bringing them to a place where they're able to finally rebuild their lives and belong.
Mhm.
And if this family ends up having to leave, and maybe they get asylum in New Zealand or America, our loss.
Yes.
Honestly, they will. I told him, I said, he'll make it. You'll make it, no matter where you go, because I believe in you.
Hmm.
But if he doesn't feel like he can make it, and he
Yeah.
feels so fragile that then I need to like do fight everything within me to make a way to help them to stay. I shared that. I don't know. It was just fresh on my mind this
Yeah.
morning, just as we've talked and about. This is the world. I think for people to realize that this is what's happening on a day to day basis with
Mhm.
people around us we might not even know that are suffering across borders. But like you said, safety is just a few miles away. And if we can transform someone's life with just the simple donation of a mile, airline miles. I mean, for anyone listening, like, especially if you're in the US, like, do it. Don't even think, honestly, because yeah, that sense of belonging and safety to be able to start and rebuild your life it's everything for people.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. It's very powerful. Just thinking about belonging and thinking about the importance of being able to feel like you are part of that community you're moving into. And I would say that, like, while that's one of the ancillary benefits of what we do with Miles for Migrants, we've had to focus intentionally on one part of the problem of the refugee journey. And that was really that transportation barrier area, and making
Mm,
sure that victims of forced migration have pathways into those countries when they have otherwise every other approval to be there. But we need partnerships with communities. We need people who care, not just to donate miles. And of course, we love your miles, but people who are there on the ground who are willing to receive families in their community, individuals in their community. And I'm really willing to go on that journey with them. So it's Miles for Migrants is one step. It's one necessary step,
mm.
and it's also one that very few organizations actually solve this problem around transportation. But of course, it's not everything, and we need really everyone to be working toward making sure that people can execute their right for safety, but also to be able to experience that belonging in those communities.
Well, it's fantastic because I know there's so many people who listening would be like, I've got a small group, or we're a part of a community group, a knitting group. I don't care, Rotary group, whatever you might be part of it. Like, we'll support a family, but they often don't have the finances or the resources to do it. There's one thing that they're lacking. And I think to know there's organizations like yours that can solve maybe just one part of that journey for someone, but such an important step. Without that flight, without that transport out, the journey can't begin, right? For their new step in life. I'm grateful for your time. I know you're a busy father of two young kids, and you wear a lot of hats in working. But it's encouraging to know that there's people like you and your team out there that that are dedicated to this, to serving these waymakers. What a joy. For you, it seems like a sacrifice, but how much joy does it bring, right, at the end of the day, right, when you get to be part of these stories? And it's something you have to remind yourself when you get stuck in the weeds of the day in, day out, you know
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, I have to say I'm just really proud of my team. We've been a small team to date, and we are still under 10 people in our organization. And we've had great people who've also come and left the organization, going on to other ventures. But without a community this would still just be an idea. This would still just be me flying one family and trying to find a way to make something bigger. But it was really with the people who came alongside me, and also the people that sometimes I followed along the way, that really made this possible. So it just underscores to me why it's important to be grateful for people who come alongside you, that also give you strength when you feel weak and you feel like maybe this is never going to take off. And sometimes you're the person to saying to others that, no, like, we are getting through this, like we are moving on, and this is an organization that's going to be 10 more years. Come on, let's go. Like, this is worldwide.
Absolutely. You're just taking off, man.
We're going to be conveners. Like, you're going to see us around. Like, our goal is to really convene people who care about human rights, and ultimately use what we know and what we can lean into to help inform the world about migration. So we have to always think big about what we're doing, but that really takes a community supporting one another and finding opportunities to reach into those places that we haven't reached into before.
Hey, I'm going to be, well, I've already made sure that we're having a regular update and catch up. I've got that scheduled in, and I'm excited to see how, you belong, and basically, the Australian community here can really participate in what you're doing. Like you said, like, let's see this thing do so much more in the next 10 years. I think our world will be better for it. I think our communities need to see that this is a win-win. This isn't just a win for those that are fleeing persecution and seeking asylum. This is a win for our communities, our countries that receive these amazing people. So it's exciting days ahead for you guys. So grateful for you, Nick. Yeah, you should be proud of yourself and your team. And I appreciate you jumping on the podcast, mate.
Yeah, thanks. And to everyone listening, feel free to reach out to me if you want to learn more about Miles for Migrants, or just talk about the things that are on your mind where you're thinking about making impacts. I'd say go for it. And if you want to talk, let's talk.
Absolutely. So how do they do that? Miles for Migrants, that's Miles with the number 4.
Yep.
Migrants.
.org.
.org. It'll be in the show notes. Nick, if you don't mind, I'll put your email or someone's email that will be able to respond and attend to their request as best and quickly as possible in the show notes as well. We want to make it easy for anyone listening to like switch this off, pull over, and take some action, right? Because it's that easy. And you've made it easy, so with all your hard work, appreciate it. Can't wait to see what the future holds. Appreciate you, Nick. Making it to the end of another episode of Justice Matters with Tim Buxton. It is an immense privilege to share these conversations and inspiring people with you. To learn more about how you can get involved or learn more about today's guest, head on over to the show notes or episode description. This podcast was produced by the master himself, Jose Villotto, with just a little bit of help from me. The featured music is the song Turning Over Tables by The Brilliance. Lastly, to my Patreon community out there, thank you so much for your support and generosity. Without you, this podcast would not be possible. If you'd like to become a Patreon and get exclusive access to behind-the-scenes content, visit patreon.com/Justice Matters and start your Give What You Can monthly contribution today, and join me and so many others in creating a world where everyone belongs. Until next time, thank you for subscribing and sharing this podcast with your friends. Justice Matters with Tim Buxton acknowledges and pays respect to the past, present, and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, now known as Australia, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual, and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.